Matthew 7 is the scripture you ought to be reading. But a wolf is shy and subtle when they're by themselves. But in a group, they can be very dangerous because they are full of anger and rage. Their unresolved hurt, their unresolved pain, their unresolved personal conflict drives them to a point where they make decisions and commit acts that they later see, there are some things that some folks can do that later they regret it. You say, well, I don't think I'll regret it. I promise you, there'll be some things that you can do that can cost you your destiny, that can cost you your life, and even though you may not admit it outwardly, you will have an inward price that you'll always have to pay because of your decisions. Wolves seek the weak as their prey. If they're weak, injured, or elderly, wolves seek people at their weakest point. So what do people who get offended do? They look for other people who get offended, and they go and try to comfort them. And in the midst of them comforting them, they gain a posse or a group around them that they can influence. And because they are full of anger and rage and unresolved hurt, and the other ones are too, do you think that's a match made in heaven or a match made in hell? Is anybody listening? They love to kill the sheep. They love the high places because they can keep an eye on their prey. They can watch them to know what they do in advance so they know how to gain an advantage on them later. Isn't it pretty sick to think that there might be some people in a church who might be looking at you on how they can gain an advantage on you if something happens to them? See, we need people to lead us that don't do things out of a selfish motive. They don't do things on how they can get us down, but they do things based on how they can cause us to get elevated and rise up. They're not the fastest, but they're animals of endurance. They can run for hours to catch their prey. I told you on Wednesday that they don't have a constant home. They're always on the move. They're going here, there, and everywhere. They don't stay in one place too long. But a couple of things I didn't mention to you was that wolves love flesh and blood. They want flesh and blood. They don't want grass. At least the goats, they've got to have some type of grass, whether it be dry or whether it be green. But a wolf, they want flesh and blood. You know why Jesus calls wolves in the church, why he calls people wolves in the church? Because they're flesh eaters. They're cannibalistic because they go after people. And they try to bite them by influencing them, by saying something negative about somebody in authority or leadership in order to minimize the influence of the shepherd over them. Do you know why? Listen to me when I say this. Because wolves like sheep, but they hate shepherds. Wolves don't mind hanging out with sheep because they want to destroy them, but they certainly don't like hanging out with the shepherds. They don't want authority figures to influence the young, the injured, or the elderly. They want to be able to do it themselves. They offer counsel to others when they need counsel themselves. They think the sermon is for everybody but them. Wolves, they love the weak. They don't want the shepherd. They want the sheep. They don't stay. They don't hang out. They don't converse. They don't fellowship with the shepherd. They'll try to minimize the shepherd's value. See, whenever a wolf goes and they they start to talk to you about something wrong with the shepherd, what they are trying to do is they are trying to minimize the importance and the value and gain an advantage on you by pulling you away from your shepherd and gaining a group unto themselves. Wolves have sharp teeth and they have big mouths. Not only do they love flesh and blood, but they will also eat the bones of their prey, leaving no sign their prey ever existed. They're one of the only animals, guys, listen to me, they're one of the only animals that don't just eat the flesh and blood, but they end up eating the bones to leave no visible evidence that they ever existed. And that's what a wolf wants to do, is they're not just content and happy eating you alive, making you suffer miserably by eating your flesh and blood, but they want everything in your family, every bloodline, every family member. They want to come after it because they want to get everyone out so they can't come back and get them. They seek destruction, not deliverance. That's what wolves do. They are greedy and they are jealous. Begin to think to myself the other day, how do we get to be wolves? How do we go from being that sweet little lamb to grow up to be that sheep? And then all of a sudden, we allow that unresolved hurt to come in, and then we allow that to rule us, and we go from being a sheep to a goat to a wolf. See, there are some wolves out there who used to be some pretty good sheep. There are some goats out there who used to be good sheep. And you've got to be careful. You can't worry about who it is or who they are. You've got to be conscious by drawing a circle around yourself and making sure that you don't end up like that yourself. Jeremiah chapter 5. Wolves get to be wolves because of deep spiritual sin that they won't deal with. They get to be wolves because they don't deal with some deep sin in their life. And because they won't deal with it, here's the thing. Look at me. When you first, do something wrong after coming to God, you should feel conviction. Look at your neighbor and say, thank God for conviction. Look at me. Thank God for guilt. It is a sign God is still there. Because sometimes He uses your conscience in order to alert you that what you are doing is wrong. Okay? And so a wolf becomes a wolf when they don't deal with some deep spiritual sin in their heart. And when they don't deal with it, and they brush off that guilt, they brush off that conviction, they brush off that humility to change, and they continue that bad pattern, that continually resistance creates rebellion. I think it is. I don't know why I ain't getting any amens, but I think it is good. See, the more you resist God, the more you resist the things of God, the more you resist being obedient to God, the greater advantage rebellion can have on your life to control your future. The other reason wolves becomes wolves is because they don't deal with unresolved hurt. Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 6. If you're there, shout yes. Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 6 says, wherefore a lion out of the forest shall slay them, and a wolf of the evening, because wolves like what? Darkness. Whenever you see a wolf, wolves don't come out in light. Wolves don't like light. You know why wolves don't like light? In part because it hurts their eyes. They don't want to see things clearly. They want the darkness to cause them not to be able to see clearly. They want the darkness. The light bothers them. Anybody who light bothers them might be in trouble. Just saying, they might be in trouble, right? Because wolves don't like light. And a wolf of the evening, doesn't say of the daytime, of the evening shall what? Spoil them. A leopard shall watch over the city. Everyone, shout everyone. The spiritual ones? The tongue-talking ones? They're part of that, right? Yeah. The church-going ones? Huh? The Bible-reading ones? The praying ones? Yeah, the giving ones? Yeah. Everyone that goeth out shall be torn into pieces, because their transgressions are many, and their backslidings increase. Their transgressions, their rebellion is what? It's great. It's many. Their rebellion hasn't decreased, it's increased. Why? Because they refuse to change and deal with issues they need to deal with. And they blame, they excuse, they never take responsibility. And because of that, they don't allow the guilt or the conviction of God to change their heart, and the rebellion gets greater. You've got to be careful, guys, to be around folks who are sinning and don't want to change. You say, well, what about my family? Well, there's a difference between fellowship and relationship. You might have to have some kind of relationship, but you don't have to be forced into having fellowship with them outside of that relationship. And because sometimes we feel guilty if we don't, and we feel guilty because we always have, we don't know when to set a boundary that can keep out what we need to keep out and keep in things that we need to keep in. Your boundaries will get blurred when you walk in rebellion and refuse the convicting power of the Holy Spirit. Your boundaries get blurred. Where was that boundary line at? Was it over here? Was it right here? Or is it over here? And then you walk outside that fence, and what happens? You get what? Bit. You get bit because you don't want to disconnect from people that walk in rebellion because they once did something right, or they helped you, or they had some kind of relationship with you. You can never allow relationship to be the reason that you stay connected to somebody who has a desire to pull you in or to take you down. So you know what happens? Here's what wolves do. Spiritual wolves, what they'll do is they'll come and they want to talk to you. They'll want to talk to you instead of going to the person. They'll start wanting to talk to you. And nowadays, you know, when you and I were kids, Steve, we didn't have social media, let alone we didn't have cell phones. Nowadays, it's amazing what people can say on social media, behind a desk, on a computer, on one of these social media websites that they don't have the courage to say to your face. You got a lot of computer courage, but come out from beneath your computer. Oh, can I get an amen? You're awful courageous when nobody's around. You're awful courageous doing like this. Right? And then somebody will use the excuse, but they're my friend and I had to have somebody to share with. Well, it's your close friends you got to be the most careful of. Oh, you see, you don't want to hear. You don't want that, because then what I'm doing is you find a way to put a disclaimer to my words and say, well, now he don't want me to have any relationship. Now he's trying to control who I have a relationship with. Can I tell you something? Yeah, I'd love to be able to. I can't, but I'd love to be able to, because I'd help you in your life to stay out of trouble if you made sure you had right connections. Here's what a good friend will do, but a good friend isn't always, feel comfortable to do it, because a good friend doesn't want to lose a good friend. But a good friend, you ever see those commercials say, friends don't let friends drive drunk? All right. Well, you know what? Friends don't allow friends to discredit their authority. Drinking is bad. Discrediting can be even worse. But let me give you some questions you ought to ask when people come. And they may not, and here's the thing. Sherry would not go to Jessica and say this. Listen to me, look at me. She would not go and say, I want to bite my authority. I want to bite my pastor. I want to bite his head. She wouldn't do it. You know why? Because she knows that would be too strong for her. So she'll do it a lot more subtly, and she'll say, you know what, can we just talk? I don't have anybody to talk to. I just need a friend. My feelings are just hurt. I'm going to be all right. Nothing's going to happen, but I just want to share this. Well, you know what? Little by little, notch upon notch, brick upon brick, you start discrediting and lowering that level that should be there and set up and stay to begin with. So what should Jessica ask? When Sherry goes and does that to her friend, here's some questions. Number one, why are you telling me this? Why are you telling me this? Because how many know a friend ought to help a friend even when that friend is hurt? How many know a friend ought to help a friend even when that friend is offended? How many know that friend ought to help that friend regardless if they may end up losing that friend for standing up for what is right? And that's the problem. See, if you don't clap and get that, that's why you're going to have issues. So why? And ask them, why are you telling me? Why are you telling me this? Number two thing, where did you get this information? Where did this information come from? The third thing you ought to ask is, did you verify the facts? Have you checked this out? You heard this, but how did you hear this? You heard that he did that, but how did you hear that that happened? Was there a video? Was there evidence? Somebody's just picking this out of their ear? Where's the verification of facts? I mean, if there's proof, you can't deny it. But somebody's word ought not cause you to believe things that are not true. And here's the problem. Here's the problem. Look at me. Look at me. The Bible said the first one to hear a matter is often the one that's believed. Number four. Look at me. Look at me. You know the fourth question you need to ask? Did you go to the person? Sherry, did you go to pastor? He won't listen to me. Sherry, did you go? Well, I've tried to go before, and I don't feel comfortable. And how many know there are times people have all their excuses why they can't? Well, and they do all these things. But yet they keep on talking instead of doing the right thing. The fifth thing is this. Here's the fifth question. Here's a good one. Can I quote you? Because oftentimes people who don't like the darkness like wolves don't want the light shed upon the things they say in private. Is everybody writing this down? Because you may need this. Steve, if you want to talk about Ralph, can I quote you? Don't say I said nothing now. This is just between me and you. I got to have somebody I can talk to who ain't going to share this. Well, if you called him a punk, then you know what? I ought to be able to say, Steve told me you are a punk. See, it'll change the way you talk, the way you address, the way you speak, if you know you're going to be quoted on what you said. It'll change everything, right? It'll change everything. You'll start talking different if somebody, can I quote you on that? No, don't, because what happens most of the time? I don't want anybody to know I'm talking to you. This is just between me and you. You know what? I'm not really upset. Well, if you weren't upset, you wouldn't be talking about it. And what we do is we find ways to make sure that we've got some secret society when we share something with somebody in advance because we don't want our names to be attached to it. And most of the time, it's because it's not the truth. Then the last question is, listen to me. Here's the last question. Can you and I go to the person and talk about this? Now, wouldn't that be mature of Jessica to say, stand up, to say, come on over here. Sherry, I love you enough. Grab her hand. I love you enough to not sit here and listen to this. You know what? instead of you identifying with the critic, let's identify with the leadership. And you know what? I'm certain that if you went to pastor, you would find out that, you know what, you may have misunderstood something. Even if he did say it, he would be the first to apologize. But let's get this thing right. Wouldn't that be a mature friend to handle it in that way? And what if Sherry said, well, I'm not going. There ain't nothing you're going to do to make me go. Then what ought to be her decision? What ought to be her decision? Say, listen, you know what? That's my boundary. If you're going to talk about my headship, if you're going to discredit my leadership and you're not willing to go, then you know what? I'm going to love you. I'm going to pray for you, but I'm not participating in it. And when you're ready, I'm going to go. And you know what? Here's what may happen. She may end up going and changing her mind and saying, you know what? You're right. Let's go. Or you know what? I'm going to go talk to him myself. Or she may say, you know what? I may have misunderstood and put more to this thing because I got offended on something I shouldn't have got offended on. She may end up saying, I'm never going to be attached to pastor. I'm never going to be attached to you again. I don't know what choice she makes, but whatever choice she does make will determine her destiny. But it's not her job to take her offense and to pet her devils. It's her job to always do what's right, regardless if it's friend, family member, blood, or relationship. God comes first, and right should always be chosen over wrong.